The root answer is because of all of the insane money printing that took place slightly over 2 years ago and then continued all the way until November of 21. So 7 months ago is when it stopped. It started in March of 2020 and stopped in November of 21. All of that printing of the money, not just here in the United States, this was going on all over the world. All over the world. Japan, forget about it. They're insane with this stuff. Western Europe was on board. China, everybody. They were all doing it. Brazil, all of them. Printing money in the basement without paying for it. Okay? Without paying for it, just running the printer. That's why we have inflation. We have too much money chasing too few goods and services. That's the definition of inflation. Okay. That's why oil prices went up. It's not that oil prices went up and then we got inflation. Oil prices went up because too much money chasing too few goods and services. In this case, a good. The good happens to be oil. There wasn't enough of it. Too much money chasing it. Boom, boom, boom. There's your inflation. Okay, now let's step back, everybody. Let's go way back. What I have here, well, that's a picture of Hail Caesar, right? There's one of the Augustan emperors. I don't know which one. Faustian, okay? That's Emperor Faustian right there. I don't remember what year he reigned. It was sometime in the 40s or 50s. Might have been no, you know what? It might have been the 70s AD period, not 70 AD, somewhere around there. All right, so that's a picture of Emperor Faustian, okay? This is what's called the denarius. And the reason I'm on this time frame, I knew it was early empire. Now, the Empire of Rome is not how everything got started. Everything got started in ancient Rome with the founding of a city in between that was buried in 7 hills about 40 miles from the ocean, or in this case, it was the Mediterranean. It was founded by an ancient Roman by the name of Romulus. That's me. Well, I don't know. My picture jumped and disappeared. Oh, but anyway, that was me, Romulus. Okay. So it was at first it was a monarchy. He was the first king of Rome. That's how the city was founded. Then about 200 years later, the king at the time was overthrown. He was overthrown by a man named Brutus, by the way. Brutus. And then Rome embarked on a very interesting governmental path. It was called a republic. A republic. And they voted. They started to get the ideas from ancient Greece. This was before Athens even. But there were already early shoots of democracy springing up from different areas of ancient Greece. And Rome took that concept and they formulated what back then was a democracy. It was called the Republic, the Roman Republic. And they voted for their leadership. We vote for our leadership. It wasn't quite the same. You had to be really rich to vote for a rich person. And if you were poor, you could only vote for a poor person that could only do poor people things. But still, there was some representation going on. An incredible thing back then, considering that over time, it became the largest republic in the entire world. But unfortunately, it wasn't to last because somebody who preceded this guy by the name of Caesar created a problem. He was assassinated. And then some guy, a great nephew of Caesar by the name of Octavian, seized power, seized it, did not become elected to it, but he seized power through wars, defeating a series of other attempts at the throne, I guess, and finally beating Mark Antony and becoming emperor, naming himself emperor. And that's when the Roman Empire was born. So the Roman Empire doesn't go all the way back to the beginning of Rome. It was started as a monarchy, it became a republic, and then in 28 AD, it was formally organized as an empire under the emperor of Augustus. Now, earliest days of the empire, they had their monetary system. It wasn't barter, sheep for hay and hay for corn kind of thing. Well, they didn't have corn, but you get the idea. They had coins, and the coins were made out of silver, primarily silver coins. And one silver coin it's called a denarius, at the beginning of the empire, had 4.5 ounces of silver. Okay? 4.5 ounces. Was it ounces? Yep, it was 4.5 ounces of silver. Okay, so a pretty heavy little coin. And if you've ever felt a coin, 1 ounce gold coin or something, you know that they can take up some space. So 4.5 ounces of silver. was in one of these coins. And it was all basically pure silver at the time. And a skilled craftsman, a painter, a bricklayer, somebody like that would get one coin for 1 day of work in ancient Rome. Pretty good. Okay. If you look at today, that would be the equivalent of paying somebody $100 a day for doing that type of work. Now, a skilled laborer, such as a plumber or something like that, would certainly make more than $100 for a full day's of work. But you can see it's interesting that we're talking 2,000 years ago. It really wasn't that different. It wasn't like, oh, they were only getting, 5 cents for their day's wage, or they were getting, $5,000. It's not that far off from today. I find that fascinating. But that's what they would get, 1 denarius coin for 1 day of work. Again, that was basically a skilled labor, skilled wage type of individual. Now, going forward, the Roman Empire is raping and pillaging everything in sight. That's what they did, taking everything that wasn't nailed down. Well, eventually, some of the mines started to wear out, and they could no longer steal truckloads and boatloads of silver and gold from surrounding governments and countries and nations and cities. But the emperors, greedy as they were, still wanted to do things. They still wanted to build temples. They still wanted to build palaces for themselves. They still wanted to pay their military, which was really the primary driver of the need back then. But they weren't getting enough gold and silver anymore. So what did they do? What did they do to solve?
What did they do, Romulus?
Did they spend less money? No. Did they find other ways to become productive? Other products and services that they could create in order to generate more money so they could pay for the things they wanted to do? Well, no, that would be too hard. No, they did the same dumb thing we did 2 years ago.
Oh, no.
They ran the printing press. They just did it a little bit differently. They didn't have printing presses back then, obviously. That wasn't invented until the 1300s. No, they ran the printing press by debasing the coin. So the denarius, instead of having 4.5 ounces of silver, by 150 years later, it only had like a quarter of an ounce of silver. It still looked the same, different emperor's face on it, but it still looked the same. It still was the same size. It still weighed the same. It's just they would put tin and copper and other nonsense in there. It was no longer the real silver that was worth a lot more than those other metals. Oh. That's the same thing when we do today. When we run a printing press, it's the same thing. It's just they do it in a different manner.
Yeah. They adding zeros to an Excel spreadsheet.
They debased their currency is what they did. Now, eventually, that debasement of the currency led to all kinds of problems that eventually led to the fall of Rome.
Wow.
So let that sink in for a moment. Let that sink in for a moment, everybody. Global economies, it doesn't matter if it's Japan, America, Western Europe, we're all doing the same thing, the same garbage. We're debasing our currencies to maintain power, and eventually this will lead to rack and ruin. Eventually it will, okay? We could perhaps be on the early stages of that with this war. Now, we could be looking at, Greg and I have talked about this and looked at this analytically, the the Shiller P ratio, would go the next 10 years to be just miserable for global assets. And I don't care if you're talking about stocks or, real estate or anything. It's just going to be miserable out there.